All right, we're here for another episode of the Clean Technica YouTube talk show, where we pick a story or a couple from the week to discuss at length, trying to bring our expertise across probably about 150 years, if you combine us all right, uh, to the table. I don't know. It would be fun to do the math on that, but no, we have decades and decades of experience, each of us. So, add it up and we've got probably 1,000, right? Yeah, that's the math, right? No, but today we have one really interesting story that Larry wrote, and it's right in line with something I've been wondering and thinking about a lot lately. But you said it really well. You put really interesting kind of context around it. So the article is When Electrification is the Expectation, How Can Automakers Break Through? And so right before we were about to record, Jose Pontes here asked you, Larry, like how you came about, with this idea, and you started talking. And I was like, wait, no, let's put that on camera. So let's hear you answer Jose's question as to how this came about.
So, Xiaopeng or Xpeng, as a lot of people refer to in the West, brought me to Guangzhou to see some of their events and see the Guangzhou Auto Show. And one thing that happened during the presentation is that they kept talking about different technologies and all these things that made their cars different, but nobody really talked about them being EVs. Like nobody's trying to sell you on it being an EV. It just was the expectation there. And I talked to some Norwegians who I spent a lot of time with there. They were great people. They're like, yeah, Norway, nobody talks about it being an EV either. It's just what you expect here. And you start looking around at all of the cars were darn good. It's not just that they're getting the big things right, it's that the little things are right. All the gaps are razor sharp and perfect. There are the level of improvement I've seen, even from the Chinese cars I saw from 2003 to now, in all the details, in the materials, in the quality, is just skyrocketed. Um, all the technology is sharp. Touch it and it just works. It's very impressive. And I just got this overwhelming feeling that when they're all good like that, how do you break through? You're seeing acceleration times that are faster than, what I dreamed about as a kid in the 80s. They're limiting cars to faster than that Ferrari Testarossa example I had now. Family cars are faster than Ferrari LaFerraris that cost $30,000 and haul people around in comfort with, all this luxurious interior. There's very few compromises that you're seeing out there. And I just started wondering, how are you going to break through? When all the cars are good, and there's some that are better than others, how do automakers really break through in that type of environment? It's a subject that I wish we had the ability to talk about in the US, because I feel like we're easily a decade behind in this, but they're reaching this level of maturity where they're all good, they're all reasonably priced, and you're at that point where it's like, well, what's next? And there that kind of competition is there. It's going to happen, and we have to think about what's going to happen next there. And a lot of different automakers are starting to answer that question in different ways. But it was just something that really I hadn't thought about, because I'm still fighting this battle to get electrification in the United States. But it's was really an eye opener, because they were just fundamentally all good. Nobody is showing ICE vehicles at Auto Guangzhou except for Western automakers and the Japanese. And Cherry. Cherry's a little bit of an outlier. They're still, have a big ICE focus. But it was just one of those things where you're seeing these consistently good vehicles. All of them are dead silent. All of them are filled with luxury. All of them are filled with tech. How do you break through in that environment? And that's a question that that needs to be answered, but it's more of a question. It's not, I'm not going to pretend I have a universal answer to that yet, but it's a question that I wanted to ponder myself as well as with people. And I'm glad that we have a global global views on this from different countries.
Yeah, it's funny about Cherry because I remember from Jose Pontes's early EV sales reports that it was pretty good early on in the EV sector in China. So it is funny how it sort of dropped off and what you say about it. Yeah, I was thinking as well, like from the U.S. perspective, it's a question you can see coming, but it's like you can't get a feel for it well because we're not in Norway, where it's almost 100% plug-in vehicle sales, and that's completely what you would expect, or China, where it's above 50% plug-in vehicle sales. And to me, it's a little surprising, like what you wrote and what you said, because even though it's at a high percentage, I would think that it was still emphasized. So it's interesting to me that it's just like it's not even emphasized anymore. But then, and even like Europe wide, like I feel like you have a different feel for like how you differentiate. The U.S. is such a it's so behind. It's such a smaller EV market that it's hard to get a feel. Like even when you track the Chinese market really closely, it's like hard to get a feel for what it's like inside the market and why brands start to rise or fall. But I think Jose probably has the best perspective on that of anyone who's from here at least who hasn't spent a lot of time in China, and Raymond has spent a lot of time in China, so we'll get his perspective as well. But we'll start with Jose. Like, what's your perspective on this question, especially like starting from the Chinese market perspective, maybe?
Yeah, looking at the Chinese market, that's around 50%. I would say give it 4 or 5 more years and it's completely electrified, like PHEV plus BEV. And for them, it's not a question of if the market will get electrified, it's just how fast. Will it be 2029, 2030? So why are you spending time with old technology like ICE? You don't need to spend your money and your marketing efforts trying to sell something that in the end will disappear. And that is starting to happen. Depends on the markets here in Europe because the realities are very different. But in some countries like Norway or Denmark, you don't talk about ICE cars. It's like old technology. It's like talking about landline phones compared to cell phones. It's the next step. And in many countries, that transition is starting to happen. And the surprises are coming from countries where you don't expect, like Poland is growing very fast. This month, Italy grew very fast also. So even on the laggards, uh, there's that sense of urgency of sensing, oh, the others are going really fast on this. So why are we getting so far behind? You know, it's
I will
inevitable,
say
I would say.
I will say one thing that goes beyond the big number, and I'm sure Raymond can give some more insight on this, is the regional numbers. If you go to Guangzhou, you see all green plates, like not just cars being sold, but cars on the road. It's probably 80% of vehicles within these mega cities, because you have what you call megapolis. It's
Yeah.
around 100 some million people, depending on how you cut it, within one continuous city that includes Shenzhen, Hong Kong, on this Pearl River Delta. And within that, it's and that's where a lot of the innovation's coming from. Within that environment, it's almost all EVs. And almost all of the Chinese brands are EVs. It's like there's still a lot of ICE out in the outskirts of China, and we talked about the north before this call briefly, but like within that area, it's probably like Norway in terms of like that kind of level of penetration.
Well,
It's
three of us have talked, and none of us have tried to answer the question yet. So let's see if
Yeah.
Raymond. It's a hard question. It's a hard. I'm going to hear what Raymond has to say, and then Raymond, give us a little background. How many times you've been to China in the past few years,
Okay.
and of course Raymond is based in the Philippines, but he's like always somewhere else. He's always traveling, covering stuff, and both he and Larry almost covered Xpeng's AI Day event for us. Xpeng
Oh
tried to
yeah.
get both of them, but both ran into visa challenges. Just took too long, so it ended up that Larry got there for the auto show, and Raymond has been all over the place. He's been to the Middle East, Japan, New
Yeah.
York, Netherlands, all over the place in the past couple weeks.
Yeah.
Raymond, what's your perspective on the, I guess, starting from the Chinese market and just how you differentiate in a markets like this that become so mature?
Well, thank you, guys. My exposure for the Chinese market started around 2003, 2004, specifically with Cherry. Now that brand has moved from now they in
Did you say
2025,
2003?
2003,
Okay.
2003.
So when
Yeah,
you were like 10 years
2003.
old?
Yeah. Come on, man. 2003. So and the exposures was with Cherry, and Cherry was doing all ice, and they were all doing knockoffs, and they were knocking off the Chevrolet Spark, the Toyota Rav4, the Tribeca, and an Audi station wagon. And then when they transitioned to electric vehicles, which was about 2009 and 2010, they started using the small platform called the Cherry QQ. And I thought that they would have led the electrification, but now they sold 2.24 million cars in 2024. That's going to be about nearly 3 million this year. But it's only about 38 38 to 40% pure EVs. The rest are still hybrids and ICE vehicles. So that I'm responding to what Larry mentioned earlier or commented earlier, why, or I think it was you, Zach, why Cherry is like, going that direction. I have no answer for that also, but if you look at the numbers, that's where they're going. Now, in Larry's article, he did mention, I think, which was something very important. He did mention that in China, a lot of the EV automakers, and I will quote unquote, have healthy gross margins. I think that's also very important in the way that they operate. So when I went to BYD last September and reported on their the way that they do patents, so they file 45 patents every day. They get about 20 patents approved. So they have over 78,000, nearly 80,000 patents running around. And the focus on technology helps them develop very, very quickly. And I think the regulatory framework also in China is vastly different from anywhere else in the world. And this is also why, like, in their patents that they create, they look at, so there are patents are specifically for the EU. There are patents that are specifically for the Asian market. And there are actually patents also for the US market, but it's not moving because there's no way to get the cars to the US for now. So um, I think from a global perspective, if we're going to look only purely at sales, um, the strategy of China is, we all believe that, oh, they're flooding the market, they're just flooding the market. Actually, I think the strategy of China, of the Chinese car makers, not of the government, although the government is involved a lot in that. The strategy is not flooding the market, but rather making it accessible. They're two different things, because although I do know that some of the arrangements for, like, in Europe, is based on inventory. They get higher incentives for bringing in more cars, and they get more incentives, meaning more profit for the dealerships and the distributors. It's really accessibility, the range of models. For example, in the Philippines with BYD, so they brought in only one model first, the Atto 3, and then in a span of a year, they brought in 7 other models very, very quickly. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the spread of that, it follows the trend, the category trend of the Philippine market. More sales on the compact to mid range, and then the commercial vehicles, they have no sales because pickups in the Philippines are luxury things. They're not used for commercial purposes, although they are classified as a commercial vehicle, right? So that follows that trend there. And then one more thing. Uh, when Larry mentioned about putting in a lot in R&D in China, they also are able to get, they're also able to get back quickly because the spread of R&D in China isn't like, for example, in the US where there's extensive testing and so on and so forth. A model usually comes out right after a particular period of validation, and then it gets market tested. This was revealed to us by the BYD people. They test on safety, they test on circuitry, technology, battery, but the live testing is done in the market, right?
And that's, I think that's really important because, you know, you have to develop empathy for what your customer is looking for. But on a certain level, when you're in a market that's moving so fast, you have to think about what their need states are going to be, not responding to what they ask for. And
Yes.
this is,
Yes.
I think this is probably the biggest challenge in China. It's like, it's the example of a latent need. It's touchscreen usability before you have a touchscreen device. It's like you have to think about all of these need states and develop this technology that's moving so fast forward, moving faster than the regulations are going. I will say that Xiaopeng is very technology focused, probably more than on manufacturing. And in that they have something called a VLA 2.0 model, which is very complicated sounding. I know you touched on this a little bit, but the way I would describe it is current AI models are kind of like that, you know, elementary school assignment that you got. Write in detail all the steps in this process, every single little thing that goes into it. And when you really get into it, you have these long narratives on something that would be very, very simple that you would just kind of do. And, you know, they have the way their model is like they kind of shortcut the long language in the middle, which is kind of like that process. And they go straight to the action, vision, action, kind of like, you know, I do boxing for fitness. So you throwing a punch, you all think you know how to throw a punch. So you throw the punch by watching people and doing this thing. And then you get correction via long language from the instruction from the coach. But I'm not thinking, oh, I'm contracting this muscle and this muscle and this muscle and this muscle and this muscle. It just goes straight the punch and then the correction in the long language. And just the way that works is, I think it could be a differentiator, but they also aren't trying to make it proprietary. They're trying to share it with as many people as possible. They want to be a licensor. So how does that differentiate in their vehicles? From my experience with it, it's pretty impressive. Like they were talking about how they drove it into Hong Kong and they didn't know what would happen when they went into Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a former British colony. They drive on the opposite side of the road. They didn't know what would happen. They just drove it and went to the opposite side of the road and drove normally, without them having to tell it to do that, which was just kind of astounding. Now they can differentiate on that now, but Huawei's also trying to differentiate on that now. And a lot of other people are competing in that space. Beyond that self-driving technology, how, you know, like, I'm like, is that a long-term differentiator or is that kind of going to be multiple people sharing that, influencing the vehicles going forward? That, you know, that was a big question because, you know, in the US, we're thinking, oh, self-driving, that's going to be the big differentiator. And in China, maybe that's not going to be. Maybe it's we have a few leading companies, we're licensing it to everybody else. And then all of these cars have that capability. I can't tell for sure from the future, but that seems like that kind of technology licensing situation could be what moves forward. So
Yeah.
that's on one side of the spectrum. Another thing we talked about, like while we were there with a few people, is like all these cars are great to drive. They're silent. They no rattles, no shakes. But on a certain level, they aren't as fun to drive as a 20-year-old Miata, right? Which is categorically not as good of a car, but still fun to drive. Do automakers kind of go the opposite direction? Kind of, you know, you could get away with a structural motor in an EV, which would be louder than what we're used to in EVs, but would give you that kind of level of feedback. No, it doesn't have the vibrations of a structural engine in an ICE vehicle, which has been in Formula One cars since the 60s, I want to say. But you could pull that off in an EV, and you could have like this fun, very direct, no, not as good in terms of silent and refined situation, but it could be fun. Is that a way you differentiate? Moving forward, that's one question we had come up.
There
Yeah.
is a one example for that, and I think it's the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, which has shift gears, so you can actually have some kind of interaction in that aspect. And reviewers have been raving about that characteristic. And this is the interesting part. Porsche had a try at that and was like, oh, this is good. My next Porsche models that will be EV will have this. The next generation Porsche Taycan will have fake gears.
Well, Jennifer Sensible, one of our writers, was pushing for this for years. But there's also now the Ioniq 6N that just came out recently. I assume it's doing the same thing. Well, I want to get back to the basics of this question real quick, and we'll just note, Larry, any connection issues you had in the past, they must be New York related, because now Raymond is in New York and he's dropped, his connection is dropped. So hopefully he'll pop back in. But I just want to sort of explain too, so much of the EV market for the past decade has the differentiators have so often been around range and charging time. And it's still like, it's always like top stuff mentioned is how much range these vehicles have, how long they can charge. And to be honest, it drives me nuts. I'm like, it really annoys me because it puts, in my opinion, way too much importance on these than there needs to be at this stage. Because frankly, like, all EVs now have enough range for a normal person. Charging time, most people are charging at home. We have an issue with charging, and people like Larry live in a big city like New York. Probably, you need something other than home charging or workplace
Yep.
charging. But you still, it's just something it's improving so fast, and it's gotten to the point where for most people buying these vehicles, it really doesn't make a difference between the models when it comes to range and charging time. Like, people have asked me how much range my 6-year-old Tesla Model 3 has now after 6 years. I'm like, how much it has lost or something. I'm like, I have no idea. It's the same pattern it's always been. I charge a couple times a week at superchargers where I'm going into the ice skating rink and the grocery store. And if I didn't have free supercharging, I would just charge overnight every 2 or 3 days. And I don't really know how much it's changed, because it doesn't matter, because it really doesn't matter. But it's like everybody's so focused on these numbers. But I think as these markets get more and more mature, that will become more obvious. Like, it's like we're going from like 400 miles range to 500. Like more and more people realize this really doesn't make a difference. So then it's like, how do you differentiate if it's not about range and charging time? And there's the old system. I mean, a bigger car, more luxurious interior. You can have cars with more power for people who want more power. But is that really all it is? And I think so the other thing I want to get is the Chinese market, why we need to focus on the Chinese market. Because for a while, like, you had BYD sort of doing its own thing all along. And it developed the E6 taxi, which was like a whole different thing from what Tesla was doing with the Model S. And it was a whole like it was a whole different approach. We don't need to dive into it, but beyond BYD, you started getting companies that sort of were copying Tesla. Like, okay, we'll have a big screen, touch screen. We'll have a lot of power, sleek design. We might even look a lot like a Tesla. And it was like a copycat kind of market feeling. But then the market just innovated so quickly, and it's been so quick to develop new models and better tech, and that it is by far the leader now in new tech and all of that. And what we're seeing there is, this kind of differentiation between what tech is included in a car. And I think we're going from something that's not just like driving a car, but to like what's the experience of this vehicle? What's like the full body experience? And who was it? Was it Lee Mega? Was it the Lee Mega that was like trying to get like all doing like six senses effects, like had like all kinds of effects going on in the car. I think it was that model. But it's kind of how do you make a car like some BYD models now include a fridge in it, a refrigerator. It's like how do you make a car like a better experience for different needs? And I think it's just sort of going to get very customized, like, okay, this is what a family would want, so we're going to put this in a car, we're going to put this in a car, we're going to have this tech, we're going to have these entertainment options, uh business focused environment, we're going to have these things on here for the executives sitting in the back seat doing a business deal. That's sort of what I feel where I feel they're headed, but yeah, someone else can jump in now and say what you think
To,
on that.
to your point, like I think especially with these 1,000-volt architecture, silicon carbide and all that, once you get around 10C, which, the industry will 5C, 10C, it's like, does anybody actually go to a different gas pump because of how fast it pumps gas? I mean, it's a non-issue. Nobody really cares at that stage. And, yes, it'll be great to have that and make sure that's reliable and everything else that goes along with it. But, the cooling systems are just amazing in that it can keep this not only charging fast, but dead reliable. They're offering limited lifetime warranties on batteries. Even in commercial sector, they're offering these extended warranties that are beyond anything in gasoline. And it's that I feel like we're covering the basics, and I feel like it's almost like food where, for most of human history, we've been struggling to have enough calories to survive. And then all of a sudden, we get to this area where now people have too many calories, and you're more likely to die of obesity than die of hunger. And you, you're in this almost land of plenty right now in terms of technology and automotive, or you're getting there in China, where for your money, you can get more than you need. And then it gets down to, well, what's the flavor that I want? Right. So, I can go to 6 different Michelin star restaurants. They're all going to be amazing and they're all going to taste completely different because they're different flavors. And I think that we're getting to that position that we can customize to different flavors. That it's not just that here is this one vehicle like a Tesla Model Y that's kind of very mainstream in its configuration that everyone has to conform to. Now we can all get exactly what we want. I can get my, 5-star dim sum and pick which things that I wanted and get to that level of customization because we're not in this kind of scarcity mindset of, well, I need a car and I need to make sure it has the range and I need to make sure it like can get there. It's almost to this point where we have to start figuring out what's good for us, healthy. Like 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds is not healthy for
Not health.
people driving down the street
Yeah. No,
on a regular basis. And then get to what fits us as individuals and human beings, and it fits our need states.
yeah. Jose, do you want to talk a bit about how, I mean, obviously the internal combustion engine vehicle market was very mature, and how you want to talk a bit about how that market would differentiate itself, how brands would differentiate themselves versus how that might be similar or different in the new EV world.
Yeah, actually, that makes sense because we are we had a time where EVs were the disruptors, so it made sense to have scale. So one model would have a lot of would have just one or two options, like the Tesla situation, and that would help create scale. But the problem is when you get into a more mature market that we are now starting to enter when it comes to the EV world, what matters is not to have scale or have the best specs. What matters is to have your customized car. Like And for example, the Volkswagen Group does that very well. So if you want luxury, you have Bentley. If you want outrageous speed and very flashy design, you have Lamborghini. Then if you want a more premium executive, you have Audi. If you just want vanilla, you just buy Volkswagen. If you want value for money that's good for your wallet, you can have Skoda. If you want something more spicy, you can go with Cupra. If you want just cheap car, you could go with Seat. So you
I
have a
do
lot of
I do
choices.
like that Cupra spice. I'm not gonna lie. I love that Cupra spice.
And I think that's the future for cars. And I think the Chinese have already realized that, and they are creating different brands to cater the different needs.
Yeah, it is funny how like Neo has. I feel like I wonder how that happened actually, because obviously they had a kind of sales ceiling with their Neo models, and I wonder if they looked at the competition, were like, this is going to be really hard to keep up with BYD or other competitors, so we need to find a different way to keep growing, or if they just were just like out of ideas with Neo, and they're like, well, why don't we just do something different? So then they launched Onvo, which is a more family-oriented brand, and they launched Firefly, which is a small like premium smart EV brand. They all talk about. So yeah, I want to get to two things. So one, they all love this phrase smart EVs, smart electric vehicles in China. And like I remember early on several years ago, like it was Xpeng or Neo, they were like adamant. I think it was Xpeng. They were adamant about how they wanted to be known as a smart EV brand, not just an EV brand. Now I feel like every brand is sort of like in the same path with that. I mean, some are more, but it's sort of like how high tech are you? And I feel like that's the key differentiator they're focused on. Is like how high tech are you? You have the latest, coolest, best tech. Are you adding new tech features? And whether that's going to last, and that's going to be a big differentiator for years, or that's sort of a short-term trend we're in, that at the moment seems to be what's driving like new models and news and sales in China. And that gets to this other topic, which is self-driving. So I think we have to talk about this because, well, two things with Tesla. So we're going to get to self-driving, but first thing with Tesla, there's a lot of people who are like just claim that Tesla just offers the best overall package, the best value for money EV, and they're like, this is just the best, and they're adamant like that's why they sell so many. And then I mean I like to point out like, but more people buy non-Tesla EVs. So so there's a reason. So even if they're top some sales charts for models, like they don't for brands or automakers anymore. And just if you add up all the non-Tesla EVs that are sold, even in the US, they're more than Tesla now. So it's like, so if Tesla offers the best, why are people buying these other EVs? So, and I feel like that no one ever really responds to that like with a good answer. But the way I mean I see it is basically people want different images and different things from their vehicles, and it doesn't matter what the miles per dollar is or whatever, which Tesla doesn't necessarily even win on anyway. But it doesn't matter that they have more infotainment options if someone doesn't care about Disney Plus on their touchscreen. So I think you just get into a point where it's like, well, what do people really care about when they buy a car? And like you said, it's often like an identity thing or a simple differentiator on performance or size or something. But then you get to the self-driving matter. So I wrote about how Tesla full self-driving is clearly getting better, and people I know here in the real world who have the latest version claim they don't have to intervene anymore, like at all. Like someone's driven over 1,000 miles, hasn't intervened. Someone hasn't intervened since Thanksgiving. um you need 1 billion miles, not 1,000, to prove something is safe, whatever. But generally speaking, it's improving, and Tesla's like trying to get to a point, and Elon talked about getting to a point where you can text while it's driving itself. But the big thing there is like, when does Tesla take on the liability? So like it doesn't matter if if it's so good that you never have to intervene, if you're still the one responsible, you have to be paying attention because you might be one of those few people who does get in an accident. It might not even be your fault, but then it's your liability if you were on the phone or something. So when is it at the point where Tesla's like, you can sleep or work or watch TV and we will take on the liability if there's an accident? And I have no idea. Nobody has any idea. But let's presume that in the next year we get there. That becomes a significant differentiator. So in the Chinese market, BYD has God's Eye, different levels of God's Eye. There's other brands. Baidu has Apollo Go, robotaxis, and I believe they're working to get their tech into normal cars as well more. So I'm curious, where do we see the Chinese market in particular going, or more broadly the auto market, with the availability of self-driving capabilities that are first a differentiator, but then are widely available? And then where are we? So I don't know what people think about that.
Yeah, I think that it will be a differentiator for a while, and I think that it'll like I think I said before, it'll go to a licensing thing. And the challenge that we have is that I think nobody in the US is willing to put Chinese software in their cars in terms of regulators. And that's going to be a challenge on a global level. Like, I wrote about Toyota's BZ7, and like that's Huawei with some other brands that we're trying to block here, and it's just like, yeah, it's good stuff, but can we actually get it here? Can we get it to function? It might be that there's still differentiators in different markets. In China, I think it's going to be a very competitive space. I think there will be some weeding out and some licensing. It could be like Android, where there are Android phones and then there are Android devices that work along that lines. I could see that happening. I don't think it's going to be a single person dominating that field with one brand in one car, then it's all proprietary. And like, I think that's going to be almost impossible in China because there are just so many smart people and they're all coming up with different ideas and different approaches that it's going to be very difficult for one company to win completely, which is Tesla's valuation.
Well, and funny with Europe, like Europe has concerns probably about Chinese software in a similar way that the US does, but then they should also have like similar concerns about Tesla, uh, about Elon Musk having that kind of ability in Europe. So I'm very curious where the US, where Europe goes in that regard. I mean, 100% US is going to block these things. I mean, I don't see, unless something dramatically changes politically. But Europe, might be like, okay, we'll let you in, but then we're going to let them in too, and then you have a real interesting market. And then Chinese situation, like they're starting to allow Tesla, but if it gets to the point where Chinese brands are offering the same thing, and the U.S. isn't letting them into the U.S., does China decide, okay, well, we've had enough of letting Tesla get special access when you're not letting our companies get access? I don't know, but okay, well, let's go with the idea that we get to the point where Baidu, Nvidia, what's the one Intel owns? No, Mobileye. Different companies are Waymo even maybe providing that tech for automakers, and it's licensed, and like most cars have these capabilities. Then where do we get with differentiation? Like, is it still the same story? Is it just the same story? Or is there a whole different thing in how cars that can drive themselves are designed and differentiate themselves for different customers, for different markets?
I think self-driving will be just another feature. It will
Yeah.
depend on the quality between brand A or brand B, but it will be a feature that will be offered by, if not all, most of them. It's like level 2 ADAS right now.
Yeah. Okay.
almost everyone is offering that because that's what customers want. Some are better, some are worse, but they all offer it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. But here's the thing. Um, in different markets, there are different regulations. Like, for example, in China, there is I'm thinking about it in my head, it's like a classification law that puts L0 to L3 in one bracket and then L3 and L4 in one bracket. And because their autonomous driving is so high, when I visited the BYD facility, they introduced the autonomous driving systems that they have. And I asked the question about regulations, and they mentioned that in China, they have a classification for autonomous vehicles, which, and this is very important and maybe a lesson for other markets, especially in the US. The responsibility, this is an answer to your question, Zach, the responsibility for whatever accident or road crash happens in a vehicle ultimately always goes to the driver. Whether you're driving with an autonomous system or not, or you're fully automated, it always goes to the owner, never to the system, because this is a legislative issue, and I'm sure in the legislative and hungry US market, this is going to be very different. In China, it's just very clear that if you do level 4 or level 5, level 3 and level 4 in different bracket, level 5, fully autonomous, it's going to be your responsibility. And interestingly, after the Xpeng, uh, the Xpeng, Xiaopeng, um, uh, the media day which we were there, I was sending messages to the engineers in and the technologists in the company, and I was asking about the regulatory issues, and they did mention that eventually even to flying cars, this will eventually even apply to flying cars, because of course, with in the case of flying cars, it's going to be like all autonomous and regulated movements in specific airways where they will pass, and because of the growth of flying taxis in the Middle East, they're looking at the same regulation to just simply um, take it and then implement it for so aside from what Jose mentioned, that yes, it's going to be just an advantage to be made available in the vehicles itself. The regulatory things are also an issue. So in the ASEAN region, the Philippines just took over the ASEAN chairmanship for 2026. I think that'll be for 3 years, and part of the discussions was AI, quantum, and electrification, electric vehicles, the growth of electric vehicles in the ASEAN region. And the Philippines isn't leading. Malaysia is the number one electric vehicle market currently in terms of sales. In Indonesia, they're growing. And, these two markets are very unique because the fuel is so cheap. It's like the equivalent of uh, 20 cents per liter. Or that's about 80 cents per gallon in the US, in Indonesia and Malaysia. So you'd think that they'll have a lot of trouble, you know, going into EVs, but they're not. They're also growing, although the growth isn't that big, like maybe 2%, 4% per year. And but a lot of companies are locating in Indonesia. VinFast is there, BYD is there, so that they can grow in the Southeast Asian market. So I think the regulation, policy and regulation is really, really important.
So one thing that I brought up with Xiaopeng while I was there is that in having been in the Philippines and trying to figure out how to drive there is it's a very social activity. It's not like these are the rules and everyone's going to follow them. These are the lines in the road and people are going to follow them. It is an activity where you're communicating with people. People are giving a nod or
Yeah.
a wave
Yeah.
or like guessing by where they're looking, where they're going. Nobody's using turn signals. And if you're using a model in the US and you think that's going to work in a market like the Philippines, you're going to be
Yeah.
have a rude awakening.
Yes.
And China's closer to the Philippines in terms of like the chaos on the roads, but it's not quite to that level. China's roads are perfect. Their drivers, maybe not so perfect. And like once you get into the Philippine environment, it's very much a social kind of interaction that's going on. Speeds are slower and you're dealing with this thing. I think that that kind of expansion is going to be very difficult for anyone who's not working into this human interaction with the vehicle. That it's going to be a very big challenge, especially in the Philippines and some of these other markets that
Well,
it's not a rules-based driving system.
yeah, I don't know if this is the same or different, but I remember in India, like, they didn't have rear view mirrors on the cars because they would drive so close to each other that they would be getting knocked off all the time. And as a passenger in a taxi, you're like either freaking out or closing your eyes because they'll get so close to like these giant trucks, and
Yeah.
there's no clear rules. And uh, it's funny too. Well, so I wonder like how you like what are those autonomous vehicles? I don't have an idea how necessarily they would handle that different type of driving environment, but I'm curious. But also, like my graduate degree, my master's degree was in city and regional planning, and there were towns starting in the Netherlands where they were getting rid of all signs and lights and stuff because they determined that if there weren't any clear signs and lights and things, that people would pay more attention to what they were doing, what others were doing, instead of just going as like a mental autopilot
Yeah. Mhm.
and then running into and having accidents. And early on, initially, it was shown to work to be safer. I don't, but that's never expanded far. And this was 20 years ago almost, and it's never expanded far. So, but it is sort of like how India works. I don't know about the Philippines, where it's like there's a lot of places where it's not like you're really following the lines and the lights and the signs. You're just and they all seem to know like how to avoid each other, but it's like really tight, and you're like you're like, do they know, or do they just like, oh, it should be fine? I don't know, but yeah, well, the liability thing is fascinating to me because I did not hear that about China. And it is interesting because in the US it will be a big differentiator because
Mhm.
if one automaker can say you can watch TV or be on your phone and we'll take legal liability, then they have a big moat there all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Um, and until they have that, it doesn't really matter. It's like ADAS. Like Tesla full self driving has like a 12% take rate. 88% of Tesla owners who are already on the Tesla bandwagon have the Tesla don't have full self driving. So it's like there's not much interest in it at this point unless that becomes something that they take the liability on for. But in China, if they're not doing that at all, if they're saying it doesn't matter, like even up to level 5, which is crazy to me, then I guess you would just get more competition because you'd have maybe the best one is clearly better, but other self-driving platforms that are good enough that you can like be on your phone, they're gonna be like, we have a similar thing, we have the same thing. You can use our system as well. And like different brands will have similar things, even if some are better than others. And I mean, some are obviously going to lead to the crashes then more than others, and maybe that gets public and weeds people out. But at the end of the day, it gets a lot more proliferation. I would assume much faster R&D, much faster innovation to try to be at the top, tier of that. But then you just don't have like, oh, only this company covers legally. Like no one covers you legally. So it's like trust what you feel like you want to trust, but no one's covering you legally. But that's wild to me to even try to fathom, especially as an American, where people are always looking for the smallest thing to sue about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So one thing that brings up, like I was in the backseat of a Denza while I was there, and the Denza D9, it's this MPV, and it's just like this super luxury, and you're reclined back, leg rests up, massage seats on. You're just like, yeah, this is kind of the way to travel, but that's not the fastest car on earth. And it was kind of terrifying how fast our driver was driving it. once you get these ADAS systems, and if this is how you're driving most of the time, you don't want a car that goes 0 to
Larry's
60 in
frozen for me.
5
Is he frozen for
seconds.
you guys?
10
Yes, he is.
seconds
Yep.
feels
Okay.
fast if you're a passenger.
Might
I
still
think
And
Oh, there
there,
you
oh,
are.
Okay.
There you are.
am I back?
You're back.
Where did I drop off?
When
I
you
was
were
just saying in the back seat, like
yes, of the
10
fastest.
seconds feels fast. 0 to 60. You don't want necessarily anything with all this capability. So then it gets into,
Oh no.
Now he went black.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it happened to me too earlier. I just
Yeah.
dropped.
New York.
We could be on
Well,
the same New York.
yeah. Well, I think I think this is a point that I was thinking about earlier too, which is like there's all this focus on how quick these vehicles are, and even as
Yep.
normal drivers now, like you don't need any. Like I
You
have the
don't.
slowest Tesla ever created, and it's too quick. It's
Right.
like it's
Yep.
just it's too quick. So, and I don't know, I don't use it anymore. The instant torque hardly ever. It is a fun, cool feature for a while, but like even Tesla doesn't really hype that anymore because it's not what's getting the mass market interested. But the more, if people are going to rely more on the cars driving themselves, they don't want jerky, quick cars. You know, they just want a car that's going to be smooth and comfortable.
Right.
Yeah, I did think of you, Jose, when he mentioned the MPV. I was like, oh, this must be Jose's like ideal vehicle because he's a big MPV lover. But
Yeah.
Yeah, Larry's back.
I'm back. I think it
Yeah.
didn't like my answer. But
It happened to me too, and we're both
maybe
in New York.
maybe get too animated, or yeah, the New York penalty.
no, but like just thinking about the dynamics, I think that that's one thing that could. One of the comments in my article was about, well, what about driving dynamics? And I think that no, the other thing about electrification, especially with active suspensions and torque vectoring, all of these things that they're including in mainstream vehicles now, is that a lot of it comes down to tuning in software and how you
Oh.
want this to work. Throttle maps are not based in like performance is not based on engine response anymore. It's
Yep.
overabundant torque, and I can figure out how much I want it to go faster, how much I depress the pedal, how much the brake does this. When I do that, and steering response, I can have this much feedback or no feedback. Depending on that. I think that it's an interesting question when we're talking about making all these different flavors for different tastes. That opens up a lot of potentials there. So I think this idea of software-defined vehicles where it's actually impacting the physical performance in a meaningful way is something that's increasingly possible with these electrified drivetrains and making it into mainstream vehicles. The other thing that I would say about that kind of this electrification is you have these different form factors like these crazy MPVs that have all this space and all this. It opens up the ability for you to do different things with form factors. We don't have to have cars that look exactly the same. I think that part of the early appeal of like a Model S is it was designed by people who thought it looked like an Aston Martin and like, long hood that's unnecessary in an EV and a lot of these other things that were going on with it was very easy for people to accept early on, but we don't have to stick with that form factor. We don't have to stick with existing driving dynamics, depending on what people might want going forward. So I think it's a good question to ask. What do people really want?
Yeah.
Going ungodly fast is something that is fun once in a while, but
Maybe
it's not something you want to do every day.
Yep.
maybe we'll leave it there unless anyone has any final comments they want to put in. But yeah, what do people really want? What do
What
people
do
want from a car in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years?
uh,
And
yeah,
how does
before
yeah.
I do that, Zach, let me just I just want to clarify what I mentioned about autonomous driving in China. So, what happens is like each autonomous government is like they have like their own rules for autonomous vehicles and autonomous driving. And when I mentioned that it's ultimately going to go to the owner, that is the general direction. But in Beijing, in a place called the Autonomous Vehicle Demonstration Zone, which is about 100 kilometers within what Larry was mentioning, megapolis and just the city. these laws are being tested. They're not yet fully implemented. They're being tested because there are other issues like cybersecurity, technical fault, inspections, scrutineering, and all of that that needs to fall in place. But the general direction is that it still falls to the owner. And if I think if you do that globally, apply it globally, it will still one give owner responsibility to the vehicle. Second, it will actually encourage having more autonomous vehicles. And we're not going to think like iRobot or you know all of these dystopian movies that the AI will ultimately take control of your vehicle. It may happen, but we need to think on a real world scale. Now, to answer the question of what people will really look for in a vehicle, for now, I think that Toyota's multi-pathway approach, which is being copied by Chery, is like sort of the transitional thing in terms of evolving from ICE to full EV. So that's the thing. Otherwise, it's really customer choice, right? Like what Jose said, it's really like that
Yeah, I
that
mean,
that
I was
yeah.
looking to just leave that question open for people, like,
Okay, let's do that.
like that's what I
To
meant, like just
answer.
open ended for everyone else, like what are people really, what are you really gonna want? Yeah, from a vehicle
I,
in 5 years, or if you were in China next next year, for example.
I
Yeah,
will say that I think China is very lucky to have this become a question. And I hope that it
Yes.
becomes a question here in the US and in multiple parts of the world because
Correct.
EVs are the future and they're far more capable and they can do more. What do people actually want from them?
yeah. One more thing I thought about on that Tesla liability issue is just, so if it does say, okay, we'll be liable, you can text and watch TV and play video games, then does it have to have insurance on each car that it's doing that for, like an individual driver has to have? Like, does it have to then, I don't know. It's gonna get interesting if they actually are at the point where Elon says, yeah, we'll take on liability, but we'll see. Yep. Jose, any final comments, questions, or all good?
Yeah, I would like to pick up on what you said regarding liability and talk about what autonomous future would be. I think the market would split in two. So there
Mhm.
will be the commercial side that will be the ride hailing, where most people in big cities will basically just have an app and use it to go from point A to point B. But outside big cities, I don't see that kind of system being the mainstream. It will be used, there will be demand, but a lot of people will have their garage, they will have their parking spot, so they can have their own car. And many people use their car as their second home. They put stuff in there, and it's like part of the family. And I don't see that kind of feeling going away. Like moving stuff from your kid from your house to a rental car, and then you use it for a day, then you move back to the house, and then 3 days later you get a new car and then you put your stuff back again. I don't see that happening.
I
So there
Yeah, and
will
just
be
want
a,
to
a market for people own cars.
yeah, and I would also keep in mind that it's a minority who buys new cars,
Mhm.
and I mean, people who buy new cars have more money, and they are not buying cars for pragmatic reasons normally. It's about identity and status and all that. So I agree. I don't think a lot of I don't I'm skeptical that the market will change that much as far as who's buying their car for themselves and who's using robotaxis. But I do think the issue of differentiation is significant when you're able to do something other than drive, and then how that's dealt with as far as liability goes. Um, and I mean, there's all kinds of levels of that. Like also like, uh, yeah, I'm not going to get into it. We've that's a different topic. But yeah, any final
I,
comments, Larry? Yeah.
one more thing on Jose. Like I think he makes a good point. In like within China, there's this kind of trend where the car is almost becoming your second living space. And a lot of people take breaks from work in their car. They use the technology because the technology is advanced there. They camping's becoming increasingly popular. A lot of people use it almost as like their mobile hotel. And you don't necessarily always want to share this with somebody, especially if you aren't sure about like the sanitation and like everything
Yeah.
going else around that. I have a feeling that a lot of people are still going to want their private vehicle if they have the option for it. And with prolific mass transit, I don't see places like China really opting for the personal vehicle as mass transit kind of mindset that a lot of people have here in the United States.
All right. I think that's good then. Yep. Definitely a lot of interesting topics, but it looks like for the foreseeable future, if we want to see the newest and hottest trends in the auto world, it's basically look to China and see what's getting buyers excited and buying new vehicles there. Thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you.